My daughter thought I didn't see her slip a strange substance into my soup. Bless her heart, she clearly inherited her subtlety from her mother's side of the family. When she walked away, I switched our plates, turning her betrayal into her own trap. What happened to her next shocked me, though frankly, given the absolute state of modern parenting, perhaps it shouldn't have. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. Because nothing says family bonding quite like crowdsourcing your global audience whilst your offspring plots your demise. The pain hit like a sledgehammer to my gut, or perhaps more accurately, like discovering your Netflix subscription has been shared with half the neighborhood. I dropped to my knees on the cold kitchen tiles, because apparently Tuesday evening was the perfect time for my digestive system to declare war on the rest of me. My hands clutched my stomach, fingers digging into flesh as if I could somehow manually reorganize my internal organs back into working order. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the evening chill, because naturally, when your body decides to have a complete breakdown, it insists on doing so with maximum theatrical flair. "Dad!" Teresa's voice cut through my rather undignified gasping. "What's happening?" Oh, brilliant timing for maternal concern, I thought, while simultaneously questioning whether this was genuine worry or simply quality control checking on her handiwork. I tried to speak but only managed a strangled groan that would have made a dying walrus proud. The pain twisted deeper, like something had decided to redecorate my intestines using only barbed wire and good intentions. "Something's wrong," I finally managed to rasp, because apparently stating the bloody obvious was all my brain could manage whilst my stomach auditioned for a horror film. "Feels like my stomach's tearing apart from the inside." Teresa dropped to her knees beside me, her hands fluttering over my shoulders with the sort of practiced concern that would have been touching if it weren't so perfectly timed. "You look terrible, Dad. Your face is gray." How delightfully reassuring, I thought. Nothing quite like your child pointing out you look like death warmed over. Her voice carried that familiar note of concern, but something else lurked beneath it. An eagerness that made my skin crawl despite the pain. Rather like a vulture expressing deep concern for the health of a particularly plump rabbit. She pressed her palm against my forehead with the efficiency of someone who'd clearly been practicing their bedside manner. "You're burning up. When did this start?" "About an hour ago," I managed, leaning against the kitchen counter for support, trying to pull myself upright. "Right after lunch. That sandwich I made you." Her eyes widened with what looked like genuine worry, Oscar-worthy performance. "Really? Maybe the turkey was bad. I should have checked the expiration date." Yes, I thought, because clearly the turkey had developed a personal vendetta against my digestive system. The refrigerator hummed its steady rhythm whilst the grandfather clock in the hallway marked each second with mechanical precision. Everything felt too loud, too sharp, as if my impending doom required a full orchestral accompaniment. I studied Teresa's face as she helped me stand, searching for something I couldn't quite name. There was something about her expression, rather like someone trying very hard to look concerned whilst secretly calculating inheritance tax. "Let me make you some light soup tonight," she said, her smile stretching across her features like cling film over a leftover casserole. "Something gentle for your stomach." "Thank you, sweetheart." The words came automatically, trained by decades of fatherhood and British politeness. "You always take care of me." "Of course, Dad." That strange smile never wavered, frozen in place like a shop mannequin's. "It's the least I can do." Her eyes didn't match her expression. Too bright, too calculating, the same look she'd worn as a teenager when she'd broken curfew and tried to convince me she'd been at the library studying advanced molecular biology. But I was too weak to analyze it properly, too grateful for her help to question the growing unease that had taken up residence in my chest like an unwelcome lodger. The evening light filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the linoleum like accusatory fingers pointing at my general incompetence. Family photos lined the walls. Teresa's graduation, my wedding day, Christmas mornings from years past. All those memories felt distant now, separated from this moment by the sort of invisible barrier that typically exists between rational thought and reality television. "I think I need to lie down," I said, one hand still pressed against my abdomen as if manually holding my organs in place. Good idea. Teresa's voice pitched higher than normal, like someone trying very hard to sound natural whilst discussing the weather after committing arson. Rest whilst I prepare something special for dinner. You'll feel better after you eat. Something special, I noted. How delightfully ominous. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without revealing that every breath required the sort of conscious effort usually reserved for advanced yoga or pretending to enjoy small talk at neighborhood barbecues. But as I turned toward the stairs, I caught a glimpse of Teresa's reflection in the window glass. Her smile had vanished the moment she thought I wasn't looking, replaced by something cold and determined, rather like a cat that's just spotted a particularly plump canary and is calculating the most efficient route to dinner. My military training whispered warnings I couldn't yet decipher, 30 years of paranoia finally finding a proper outlet. After 3 decades in the army, I'd learned to trust my instincts about people. And right now, every instinct was screaming danger with the sort of enthusiasm usually reserved for fire alarms and political campaigns. But this was my daughter, the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, back when the world made a semblance of sense and children didn't plot their parents' demise over the dinner table. I gripped the banister, each step up to my bedroom feeling like scaling Everest in flip-flops. 13 steps that had never seemed particularly challenging before now loomed like a personal Mount Doom, complete with the sort of dramatic exhaustion that would have made Frodo weep with recognition. I collapsed onto the edge of my bed, the mattress creaking under my weight with all the dignity of a dying accordion. The climb had drained what little energy remained in my aching body, leaving me feeling rather like a deflated balloon at a children's party, present, but hardly contributing to the festivities. Outside my bedroom window, dusk painted the suburban street in shades of amber and gray, because apparently even the weather felt the need to provide atmospheric accompaniment to my domestic crisis. My gaze fell on the nightstand where Margaret's photograph smiled back at me. 10 years since cancer took her, and I still reached for her perfume bottle during moments like these, as if expensive fragrance could somehow solve the problem of potentially murderous offspring. The glass felt smooth and cold against my fingertips, a tangible connection to better times, when the most dangerous thing in our house was Margaret's experimental cooking rather than our daughter's apparent career change into recreational poisoning. The pain in my stomach was subsiding, replaced by a different kind of discomfort. Something about Teresa's behavior downstairs nagged at me, triggering memories I'd tried to bury with the sort of determination usually reserved for embarrassing Christmas photos and tax returns. She'd been 16 when everything started falling apart, back when teenage rebellion typically involved slamming doors rather than potential homicide. I could still see her standing in this very room, tears streaming down her face, fists clenched at her sides like a tiny, ineffective boxer. "You hate me," she'd screamed, her voice raw with grief. Mum would never have stopped me from going to that party. I'd tried to comfort her then, but my words came out all wrong, rather like trying to perform brain surgery whilst wearing oven mitts. "I'm protecting you. You don't understand how dangerous the world can be." If only I'd known, I thought grimly, that the real danger would be sitting across from me at the dinner table, discussing soup recipes. Margaret would have known what to say. She'd always been the bridge between Teresa's wild spirit and my rigid discipline, the diplomatic translator in our family's ongoing Cold War. Without her, we were two broken people speaking different languages, like trying to have a meaningful conversation through Google Translate. The memory shifted to a year later. Teresa, at 17, dressed in clothes that showed too much skin, her makeup applied with the sort of teenage defiance that could power a small village. "Everyone else is going," she'd argued, clutching car keys I'd forbidden her to use. "You can't keep me locked up forever." "As long as you live under my roof," I'd started. "Then maybe I won't live here much longer." The threat hung between us like a blade, sharp and inevitable. True to her word, she'd left the day after her 18th birthday. I watched from this same window as she loaded her car with everything that mattered to her. No goodbye hug, no backward glance, just the slam of a car door and the sound of tires on gravel. Rather like watching your heart drive away at 30 miles per hour, if hearts came with number plates and a tendency toward dramatic exits. For 10 years, contact had been minimal. Birthday cards with no return address, like receiving post from a particularly elusive ghost. Occasional phone calls that lasted 3 minutes, just long enough to confirm we were both still breathing but not long enough for actual conversation. I told myself it was better this way, that she needed space to grow up. Brilliant parenting philosophy, I reflected. Give them space and hope they don't use it to plot your demise. Then last month, she'd appeared on my doorstep with 2 suitcases and hollow eyes, looking rather like someone who'd been chewed up by life and spat out onto my front garden. "I need somewhere to stay," she'd said, avoiding my gaze. "Just temporarily." I'd welcomed her back without questions, desperate to rebuild what we'd lost. Maybe it was guilt driving my generosity, or maybe just loneliness, the sort of bone-deep solitude that makes people adopt cats or take up conversations with houseplants. Either way, I'd been trying too hard to make up for lost time, showering her with the sort of paternal attention that apparently drives children to consider patricide as a viable life choice. Then why phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message from an unknown number, "Checking on you. Hope you're feeling better. T." How thoughtful, I mused. Nothing quite like anonymous well wishes from someone who's currently downstairs, presumably not texting. Teresa was downstairs. Why would she text instead of simply calling up the stairs like a normal person? Unless, of course, normal behavior had gone completely out of fashion, which wouldn't surprise me given the general state of things. I stared at the message, confusion mixing with the remnants of physical discomfort like a particularly unpalatable cocktail. Another sound from the kitchen, something glass hitting the floor, then silence. "Everything okay down there?" I called out. "Fine, Dad." Her voice carried a forced cheerfulness that could have powered the national grid. "Just dropped a spoon." But I'd heard glass, not metal. Fascinating, I thought, how spoons have apparently evolved to sound exactly like breaking glassware. I touched my wedding ring, seeking comfort in its familiar weight. Margaret used to say I worried too much, that my suspicious nature came from too many years dealing with military intelligence. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was seeing threats where none existed. Or maybe, whispered a treacherous little voice in my head, your darling daughter is trying to murder you for your pension. "Dad, soup's ready. Come down." "I'm coming, sweetheart," I called back, because apparently walking into potential danger required the same sort of polite acknowledgement as accepting a cup of tea. The kitchen glowed with warm overhead lighting, and the aroma of chicken broth filled the air. I paused at the doorway, taking in the scene before me like a detective surveying a crime scene, which, as it turned out, wasn't entirely inaccurate. Teresa stood with her back to me, hunched over the counter near the stove. Her shoulders moved in quick, deliberate motions, rather like someone performing surgery or possibly preparing to commit it. 2 white bowls sat side by side on the granite countertop. Steam rose from both, but something about Teresa's posture sent alarm bells ringing through my military-trained mind with the sort of urgency typically reserved for air raid sirens and tax audits. She was stirring one bowl with intense concentration, her movements sharp and urgent. I watched as she reached for something, a small glass vial barely larger than my thumb. With practiced efficiency, she tipped white powder into the left bowl, stirring rapidly to dissolve whatever she'd added. How delightfully domestic, I thought. Nothing quite like watching your child season your soup with what appears to be recreational pharmaceuticals. The motion was quick, professional, like she'd rehearsed it. Which, given the circumstances, she probably had. One doesn't simply stumble into patricide without proper preparation. My breath caught in my throat. Time seemed to slow as understanding crashed over me like ice water during a particularly brisk shower. My own daughter was poisoning my food. Well, I reflected with the sort of bitter clarity that comes with impending doom, this certainly puts a new spin on family dinner time. Every instinct screamed at me to confront her, to demand explanations, to grab her shoulders and shake sense into her like a human snow globe. But 3 decades of tactical training overrode emotion, because apparently the army had prepared me for many things, including discovering that my offspring had taken up homicidal cookery. I remained frozen in the doorway, watching my child transform into a stranger with all the emotional stability of someone watching their favorite television program get canceled. Teresa straightened, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She tucked the vial into her jeans pocket with the casual efficiency of someone hiding evidence, which was exactly what she was doing. "Almost ready," she called, her voice artificially bright, like a children's television presenter announcing the apocalypse. "Just letting it cool a bit." I forced my feet to move, entering the kitchen as if I'd seen nothing. "Smells wonderful. You really do take care of me. I made this specially for you." She gestured toward the bowls with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Should help with your stomach." How considerate, I thought. Nothing quite like a daughter who takes such keen interest in your digestive system's permanent termination. The left bowl, the poisoned one, sat closest to where I usually ate. She knew my habits, had planned this down to the smallest detail. Rather like planning a dinner party, except instead of worrying about the wine selection, she'd focused on ensuring the guest of honor wouldn't survive dessert. "I'll just grab some bread from the pantry," Teresa said, turning away from the counter. This was my chance. The moment she disappeared, I moved with the speed and silence that had kept me alive in hostile territories, though I'd never imagined the most hostile territory would be my own kitchen. 3 quick steps to the counter. Swap the bowls. Step back to my original position. The entire exchange took less than 10 seconds, executed with the sort of precision that would have made my drill sergeant weep with pride. "Take that, you murderous little sociopath." Teresa emerged with a loaf of whole wheat bread, still wearing that forced smile. "Perfect timing. Everything's ready." She carried both bowls to the table, placing the poisoned soup directly in front of her own chair with the sort of confidence that comes from absolute certainty in one's own cleverness. "Oh, this is delicious," I thought, settling across from her. "In every sense except the literal one." "How does it taste?" she asked as I lifted the first spoonful to my lips. "Perfect. Just what I needed." The soup was actually quite good. She'd always been a decent cook when she put effort into it, apparently including when that effort involved attempted murder. Teresa took her first sip, and I studied her face for any sign of recognition. Nothing. She continued eating with apparent enjoyment, occasionally glancing at me with what looked like anticipation. Rather like watching someone unwrap a present, I mused, except the present is their own doom, and the wrapping paper is their complete ignorance of basic bowl-swapping techniques. Minutes passed in intense silence, broken only by the scrape of spoons against ceramic and the sound of my daughter slowly poisoning herself with her own treachery. I found myself watching every movement she made, waiting for the moment when realization would dawn. How long before the poison took effect? What had she used? The suspense was killing me, which was deliciously ironic, considering that was supposed to be her job. "You seem better already," she observed, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "Colors coming back to your cheeks." "Yes, much better." I managed to keep my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. "Thank you for taking such good care of me." The irony of those words felt like acid in my throat. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had just tried to murder me, and she was sitting across from me making small talk whilst unknowingly consuming her own poison. Life, I reflected, has a sense of humor that would make a funeral director blush. "I should probably get some rest now," I said, pushing back from the table. "Let this settle." Of course, Teresa stood as well, beginning to clear the dishes. I noticed she avoided looking directly at her own bowl, now nearly empty. "I'll clean up down here." How wonderfully domestic, I thought. Nothing quite like a potential murderess tidying up after her failed assassination attempt. "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Dad." "Sweet dreams." The casual endearment felt like a knife between my ribs, delivered with all the warmth of someone wishing their victim pleasant dreams of the eternal variety. I climbed the stairs again, but this time my legs shook not from illness, but from the terrible knowledge of what my daughter had tried to do. Each step felt heavier than the last, carrying the weight of betrayal and the distinct possibility that my child had just poisoned herself with her own murderous incompetence. Sweet dreams, indeed. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Teresa's hands adding that white powder to my soup, performed with the sort of casual efficiency that suggested this wasn't her first venture into culinary homicide. My own daughter, the child I'd taught to ride a bicycle, helped with homework, walked down the aisle at her high school graduation, had tried to kill me with all the premeditation of someone planning a weekend shopping trip. I paced the room like a caged animal, from window to door and back again. The digital clock on my nightstand mocked me with its steady progression: 21:47, 21:48, 21:49. Time crawling forward whilst my mind raced in circles like a hamster on particularly strong coffee. What delightful father-daughter bonding, I thought grimly. Most families argue about curfews or university choices. We're apparently discussing murder methods over dinner. What did she put in that soup? Some household poison? Prescription drugs? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them, rather like rabbits with anxiety disorders. Where would a 28-year-old get poison? How long had she been planning this? Had she been researching online, browsing how to murder your father for dummies? Whilst I slept peacefully in the next room, around midnight, I checked the door locks, then the windows, then walked through the house verifying every possible entry point. Military habits die hard, and right now I felt like I was back in hostile territory. Except this time, the enemy had my eyes and her mother's stubborn streak. The photos on my dresser seemed different now, charged with new meaning. There was Teresa at 16, holding her driver's license with a proud smile. Had she been planning my death even then? At what point had my little girl decided her father needed to die? Probably around the time she discovered I had assets worth inheriting. I reflected with the sort of bitter clarity that comes at 2 in the morning. I pulled out my will from the filing cabinet, studying the beneficiary information by lamplight. Everything went to her. The house, my pension, life insurance worth £200,000. More than enough motive for someone desperate enough. But why desperate? What had changed since she'd returned home last month? She'd been secretive about her life, but I'd attributed that to embarrassment about whatever failures had driven her back to her childhood bedroom. Now I wondered if something darker had been driving her. Perhaps she'd been taking life advice from particularly entrepreneurial sociopaths. My phone buzzed. Another text from an unknown number: "Hope you're feeling better tonight. T." She was texting me from downstairs. Or had she left the house? I moved to the window overlooking the driveway. Her car sat empty in the pale moonlight, but lights still glowed from the kitchen windows below. How thoughtful, I mused, to check on my health after attempting to terminate it permanently. Another memory surfaced, teaching her to make soup when she was 12. Margaret had been in hospital for tests, and Teresa wanted to surprise her mother with homemade chicken noodle soup when she came home. We'd stood in that same kitchen, me guiding her small hands as she stirred the pot. "The secret ingredient is love, Dad," she'd said with the earnest wisdom of childhood. Tonight, the secret ingredient had been poison. How times changed up by 2 in the morning. My rage had crystallized into something colder, more calculating. This wasn't just betrayal, it was attempted murder, planned and executed with all the charm of a tax audit. My military training kicked in, the same analytical mindset that had kept me alive in Afghanistan, though I'd never imagined I'd need it to survive family dinner. Assess the threat: murderous daughter with access to household chemicals. Gather intelligence, evidence of premeditation and motive. Plan the response: confrontation followed by complete severance of relationship. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow, I would confront her with what I knew and watch her reaction. If she tried to deny it, I had evidence. If she tried to run, I'd be ready. Rather like Christmas morning, I thought grimly, except instead of opening presents, we'd be unwrapping attempted murder charges. The silence from downstairs had been complete for over an hour. Either she was asleep or pretending to be, possibly dreaming of inheritance taxes and funeral arrangements. I found myself listening for any sound: footsteps, doors opening, the creak of floorboards. Nothing. My eyelids felt heavy, but I forced them open. No sleep tonight, not whilst a would-be murderess lived under my roof. The things they don't tell you about parenthood. The first pale light crept through my curtains as I heard movement in the kitchen below. Teresa was awake, presumably discovering the delightful consequences of her own culinary creativity. It was time for answers. I dressed slowly, each movement calculated, then made my way downstairs with the grim purpose of a man about to change everything. The morning light streaming through the windows felt harsh and unforgiving, perfect for what lay ahead. Teresa sat hunched over the kitchen table, still in yesterday's clothes, her face pale and drawn. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she clutched her stomach with both hands, looking rather like someone who just discovered that karma has a particularly twisted sense of humor. When she looked up at me, I saw genuine pain there and confusion. "Dad," she whispered, her voice weak, "I feel terrible. My stomach is on fire. I think I have food poisoning." Food poisoning, I thought with grim satisfaction. How delightfully accurate, if somewhat understated. I poured myself coffee with steady hands, studying her over the rim of my mug. She looked genuinely ill, which meant the poison was working exactly as intended, just not on its intended target. "That's interesting," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "What exactly did you add to my soup last night?" The color drained from her already pale face, leaving her looking rather like someone who just realized they'd brought a knife to a gunfight and forgotten to load the knife. I don't know what you mean," she stammered. "Don't you?" I leaned back, maintaining eye contact with the sort of steady gaze that had once intimidated enemy combatants. "Think carefully, Teresa. What did you put in my food?" "Dad, you're scaring me." She tried to stand but immediately sat back down, clutching her abdomen. "I just made soup. Regular soup. Regular soup with irregular additives," I thought. How wonderfully evasive. I saw everything. My voice carried the cold authority I'd used with subordinates in the army. Every movement, every gesture, when you poison my food. "You're paranoid," the words came out sharp, desperate. "You're imagining things." "I would never." "Then you won't mind that I switched our bowls whilst you got the bread." The statement hit her like a physical blow. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her eyes wide with shock and dawning horror. You what?" she stammered. "That's impossible. I watched you add white powder to the left bowl. You served me the right one, thinking I'd get the poison soup. But whilst you were in the pantry, I made a simple adjustment. Rather like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, I thought, except in this case, the Titanic was her murderous plan, and I was the iceberg." Teresa's hands flew to her throat, then back to her stomach. No. This can't be happening. You tried to kill your own father. Each word fell like a stone between us. How does your own medicine taste?" She lurched to her feet, swaying dangerously. "You don't understand. I wasn't trying to hurt you." "Then what was in that vial?" "Vitamins." Tears streamed down her face now. "I needed the money, Dad. I'm in trouble. And I thought maybe if you just got sick enough to go to hospital. You thought you'd inherit faster." The rage I'd held in check all night finally broke through. "You couldn't wait for me to die naturally, so you decided to speed things along. It wasn't supposed to be fatal," she sobbed. "Just enough to make you weak, maybe have a heart attack. It would have looked natural." The casual way she discussed my murder chilled me more than outright hatred would have. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was calculated, planned, rehearsed with all the emotional investment of someone planning a dinner party. Except the guest of honor was meant to be permanently indisposed. "Get out." My voice was quieter now, but infinitely more dangerous. The sort of quiet that precedes volcanic eruptions and tax investigations. "Dad, please. Get out." I roared, standing so quickly my chair toppled backward. "You have 10 minutes to pack whatever you can carry, and then I never want to see you again." Teresa stumbled toward the door, then turned back with wild eyes. "You can't throw me out. I'm your daughter." My daughter died the moment she put poison in my food. I pulled out my phone. 9 minutes now. Unless you'd prefer I call the police instead. She ran then, her footsteps thundering up the stairs. I could hear drawers slamming, objects being thrown into bags with all the dignity of a jumble sail in a hurricane. True to her word, she was back in 8 minutes, dragging 2 suitcases behind her like a particularly incompetent refugee. At the front door, she turned one last time. "You'll pay for this," she hissed, all pretense of remorse gone. "This isn't over." The slam of the front door echoed through the house, leaving me alone with the terrible silence and the knowledge that my daughter had chosen her path. Now I had to choose mine. Rather like choosing between gangrene and amputation, I reflected. Painful, but ultimately necessary for survival. 3 weeks later, I sat in the witness chair of Cook County Courthouse, delivering the final testimony in what had become the most expensive family therapy session in recorded history. Judge Martinez reviewed the evidence before delivering her verdict. Recordings, detectives' investigations, poison analysis, private investigator documentation. Everything painted a clear picture of premeditated attempted murder with all the subtlety of a fireworks display. The defendants are found guilty on all charges, she announced. Teresa sat at the defendant's table, staring at her hands. She'd aged years in 3 weeks, looking rather like someone who'd finally grasped the concept of consequences. Her accomplice, Hubert, because naturally there'd been an accomplice, a small-time con artist who'd convinced my daughter that patricide was an acceptable career move, maintained his defiant posture, though his expensive suit couldn't hide the defeat in his shoulders. Mr. Brown, the prosecutor said during sentencing, how do you feel about your daughter's conviction? I looked directly at Teresa as I answered. Sometimes justice requires difficult choices. I choose to protect future victims over protecting someone who tried to murder me. Rather like choosing between chocolate and cyanide, I thought. The decision writes itself. 6 months later, I received a letter from Teresa. She'd found religion in prison and wanted to apologize, asking for another chance to be my daughter. I read it once, then filed it with the other legal documents from her case. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way, particularly when they were ignited with attempted murder and seasoned with a complete lack of genuine remorse. As I watched the Florida sunset from my new porch, surrounded by friends who valued honesty over blood relations, I knew I'd made the right choice. Sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into, and significantly less likely to poison your soup. If you enjoyed this delightfully dysfunctional tale of family bonding gone wrong, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. Preferably whilst checking your own soup for suspicious additives, because you never know when dinner might become a murder mystery.